Anybody used to be a Presbyterian in the room? You're predestined not to be. How many of you there's the old thing about predestination versus free will. And it's one of those things. There were two ladies in that Bible study I talked about last week from Memorial Drive Christian Church. And they were sisters. They were in their 80s. Their names were Virginia and Shirley, and they had lived together single their entire lives. So they sounded like an old married couple most of the time. But we always tease back and forth about predestination and free will. So, which do you believe in? Do you believe that you are predestined to do certain things at certain times all the time? Or do you believe in total free will? Because let me tell you, there are scriptures that will support both of those. Are there some people whose God had predestined for greatness? As we go through this morning, I want you to keep that message and that idea simmering in your head. Are there people in the world that God predestined for greatness? Now, I don't know about you, but when I look back through history, I can find some people definitely that have done great things. People like Abraham Lincoln, or Thomas Edison, or Steve Jobs, or Rosa Parks. Now, Nick always argues with me, and he says that Thomas Edison really wasn't an inventor. We say that he invented all these things, and Nick will tell me, no, he's more like Steve Jobs. He had great ideas, but he had to find people to do it for him, and then he took credit for them.
He was the one who patented everything.
But think about it. There are so many marvelous things we attribute to people like Steve Jobs and Thomas Edison. I mean, we're sitting here and we have light because of Thomas Edison. We have listened to music. We watch television. We can hold a powerful computer in our hand because of an idea that Steve Jobs had. And let's face it, you can make a phone call on it too. As for Edison, I've always wondered if he realized the impact he was making on the world at the time when he was living it. Both of these guys dreamed up more ideas in a lifetime than hundreds of other people dream up in their entire hundreds of lifetimes. And for this, it can be difficult for us everyday folks to relate to people who are great, or we think of as great. But let me ask you this. Do you think their impact was any more special than the impact Rosa Parks made in a bus in December of 1955? Not obeying a bus driver to give up her seat to a white passenger, and at the time, she was serving as the secretary of her local NAACP, but she was acting as a private citizen. And although she's honored for it now, she suffered a lot for taking a stand. She lost her job where she worked, not because she was doing anything wrong at her job, but because of this incident. And her decision to not take it anymore changed the course of human history. One woman. So what do you think? Did she do all that of her own accord, or was it a God thing? Is it possible Rosa Parks was born to start a movement? Or is she just somebody who was there at the right time, at the right place to stand up for justice? We don't know. But it's fun to speculate about it. If God put her there at that moment, we don't know. I like to think she was just an ordinary lady doing the best that she could, just like we do. And just like Rosa Parks, I believe we've all been born for greatness. This morning I want to show you why I think that. And so we're going to take a trip into the chronicles of history and read about an ordinary young man who was born for greatness. Let's pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started in the desert sun way down in a pit. Down in a pit. Now I'm going to leave a lot of details out in these 20-some chapters. Okay, I'm just going to be honest with you. There's going to be a lot of details left out as I tell this story. Go read it. It's really good. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, or at that point he was being called Israel. So he's the 11th son, and he's probably safe to say that he was a spoiled brat. He was daddy's favorite little boy. And he made sure everybody knew it. In Genesis 37 it says, now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of these other sons because he had been born to him at an old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than he loved them, they hated him for it and could not speak a kind word to him. Because he put this coat on and he's twirling around in it going, look, I'm better than you. Not a little kid wouldn't do that, would they? The story continues, and his brothers are out in the field with flocks, and one night, Joseph has a dream. And he quickly goes to his brothers and says, hey, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood up tall. And your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. That didn't go over very well. And the brother's like, do you think you're going to reign over us? You're going to rule over us. You. Now, apparently, Joseph didn't catch the sarcasm because he had another dream and he went straight to his brothers again. And he said, listen, I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. They told his father that one, and his father wasn't very happy either. You think your mother and I and all of your brothers are going to bow down to you? Now, this really ticked his brothers off. His father, though, dreams are something you don't mess around with. So he kind of just kept it in the back of his mind. So here's Joseph. Daddy's little boy, his favorite, wearing his special robe made just for him, and nobody else gets one. And he has these two dreams that cause resentment. Now, from the older brother's standpoint, it's kind of like Joseph was saying, I'm the greatest, I was born for greatness, and y'all need to know how great I am. Why don't you go ahead and bow down to me now? Now, was the dream prophetic? Of course it was prophetic. Should Joseph have flaunted it at his brothers? I don't know. From a human perspective, probably not, but from God's point of view, maybe it was the intention that they'd remember that. So they'd say, let's look at that dreamer, they'd say to one another, come on, let's kill him. Let's kill him, throw him into one of these cisterns, and say a ferocious animal devoured him, and then we'll see what comes of his dreams. One of the older brothers, Reuben made sure he didn't die. He said, let's not kill him. Let's not shed any blood. Let's put him down in the cistern here in the desert, but let's don't kill him. And I think Reuben was going, I can go back and get him later when the others aren't around. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped that robe off of him, and they threw him down in this deep cistern, and they sat down to eat their meal, and they looked up and saw a caravan of their cousins coming. The Ishmaelites were coming down the road. Now remember, Abraham was the father of Isaac and Ishmael. So the Ishmaelites would have been their cousins. But, not necessarily talking to each other. You know how family can be. So these Ishmaelites are coming down the road from Gilead, and they were on their way to Egypt, and Judah says, we don't get much if we kill him. Let's sell him to our cousins, the Ishmaelites. And let's not all lay our hands on him. After all, he's our flesh and blood. Let's let them take care of it. And so everybody agreed, and they pulled him up out of the cistern, and they sold him for 20 shekels of silver. And the Ishmaelites took him to Egypt. Now I'm going to skip a whole bunch right now. We're in Egypt now, got it? An Egyptian named Potiphar, he's a captain of the guard of the Pharaoh, he bought him. And he lived in his house for many years, and he prospered there. And his master saw that God was with him, and that God gave him success in everything that he did. So they just kept putting him in charge of more and more things. Put him in charge of his household, everything that he owned. And then the Lord blessed it. The blessing of the Lord was over everything Potiphar had because of Joseph. Everything's in Joseph's care now, and Joseph's in charge, and he didn't concern himself with anything except for the food he ate. Now, we don't know how much time's happened here, but at least a few years have gone by, and was probably a striking young man at this point. Physically fit, doing well. Potiphar had given him a place of prominence. Even though he was a slave, he was over the household. And being a righteous young man, even though his hormones were probably raging, when Potiphar's wife came around and took a liking to him, he didn't give in. And he kept refusing her advances. Now, what happens when the advances get refused? His wife goes immediately to Potiphar and said that he raped her. So he went from a pit all the way up to being the head of a household. And guess what happens when you get accused of raping somebody's wife? You're back in a pit. You're back in prison. He didn't do anything wrong, but Potiphar had to take the word of his wife over a slave. So they threw Joseph in prison. And he probably wondered if life could get any worse. Scripture says that Joseph would keep his eye on God and his heart on God. And after some time being in prison, the warden noticed that Joseph wasn't a common criminal. He noticed that he was a pretty bright guy. He could read, he could write, he could count. And so guess what? The warden put him in charge. The warden learned of Joseph's prophetic gift with dreams, and about this time, 2 of Pharaoh's servants got thrown into prison. The cupbearer and the baker were both accused of crimes against Joseph. Now, what did I say? Against Joseph, against Pharaoh. Against Pharaoh, sorry. And Joseph, they came to him and said, these 2 guys have had dreams. Would you listen to their dreams? And he listened to both the dreams, and because of his listening to these dreams and figuring out what they meant, the cupbearer went free and went back to Pharaoh's house because he was innocent. But the baker, he did what he's supposed to have done. And he was punished. The cupbearer went back to the court and forgot about Joseph for a while. A couple years go by, and Pharaoh starts having weird dreams. And nobody in the court has been able to figure them out. So the cupbearer says, hey, I remember this guy from prison. And he's the one that interpreted my dream to help prove my innocence. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. And he said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, no, I don't. God interprets dreams, and I can usually explain. He made sure that Pharaoh knew it wasn't him, but it was God. Keep in mind, that could have been dangerous because Pharaoh considered himself the sun god, Ra. So it took guts. And, probably the same kind of guts it took Rosa Parks to say, no, I'm not getting up. So he tells him the dreams, and there were two dreams. The first dream, Pharaoh says, I saw 7 fat, beautiful cows. Then I saw 7 thin, bony cows, and the thin ones ate the fat cows. And the second dream, I saw 7 heads full of ripe grain growing on one stalk. Then I saw 7 thin, dried out heads of grain, and the heads of grain began to swallow up the 7 good heads. And Joseph said, the 2 dreams mean the same thing. The 7 fat cows and the 7 full heads of grain mean 7 years of good crops, good prosperity. And the 7 thin cows and the 7 thin grains mean 7 more years where there will be famine in the land. So Pharaoh responds, can we find anyone like this man, one of whom there's the Spirit of God? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, I'm going to put you in charge of everything. All my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Let's recap. Smart aleck kid thrown in a pit. Sold off, out of the pit, a slave, head of a household. Thrown in prison. Moved up to where he's running the place. Came over, figured out Pharaoh's dreams, running the whole place. Talk about being born for greatness. As the story progressed, things happened just as God had given the vision. The land was richly blessed for 7 years. And Joseph said, if we've got 7 years, we're going to store. And he made sure that they had enough so that when the 7 bad years started, they'd have enough to make it through those 7 years as well. Everything worked because God worked through Joseph. Now, during all these years, Joseph married a woman and had 2 beautiful sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, after the drought had happened, and we're in the 2nd year of the drought, the famine reached as far as Canaan. And Joseph's family suffered along with everyone else. But the family heard rumors that there was food in Egypt. And there was one person in charge that they had to go through. So the brothers set off for Egypt. And now little did they know that it was Joseph that they would have to deal with, and little did they know that it was Joseph that they were going to be bowing down to like a sheaf of grain. Nevertheless, they took off for Egypt to buy grain, and they arrived and noticed the rumors were true. And as fate would have it, they encountered their brother, even though they didn't realize it. 22 years have passed. 22 years. Joseph is 39 years old now. He's at the height of his career. And so Jacob's son traveled to Egypt. They beseech Joseph, please help our family. And he recognized them and blesses them. But he wanted to reveal himself to them to make sure that his father and younger brother were well. So he designed kind of a ruse of sorts to reveal himself and bring his family back to Egypt in order to bless them, as some say God predestined. Joseph said, "Come close to me. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into slavery in Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. You did it for evil, but God intended it for good." Hurry back. Bring my father. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, and your children and your grandchildren and your flocks and your herds and all you have I will provide for you. Because there's still 5 years to go of this famine. If you don't come back and let me help you, your whole household and all that you belong to and all that belong to you will become destitute. So his brothers and Joseph, they become a family again. His brothers travel back to Canaan and tell Jacob what happened, and together his whole household, they travel back to Egypt just as God ordained. God was with Joseph. He was with him in Jacob's house. He was with him in the pit. God was with him in the house of Potiphar, in prison, and God was with him when he ruled over Egypt. Good times or bad, Joseph never forgot that God was with him. Again, Joseph says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." He lived as a slave and a prisoner, the bottom rung of society, the top rung of society. He never had a slave mentality. He always looked forward to what God can do with him next. We have to believe that Joseph was born for greatness, but not so his brothers would bow down to him in some sick, human envy, worldly manner. Joseph was born to provide for the nation. He probably didn't realize that at the same time he was thrown in a well. He probably felt pretty bad at that point. But as he got older and thought back on his life, he understood the whys. Sometimes, even though you don't realize it at the time, you end up right where you're supposed to be. That, my friends, is a God thing. I don't think it's predestination. I think it's just you end up where you need to be. And if you'd made decisions differently, God would have found a way for you to be there. Most of you, I've told the story about the accidental phone call that ended up with me going to Houston. If you haven't heard any of these stories, let's have lunch. I told you about putting my papers out and having a phone call with Loma and coming over and seeing this building, and the chairman of the board happened to be here, and he said, "What was your name again?" And I said, "It's John Malget." He goes, "Hold on," and he pulls out his phone, flips open his email, and he goes, "Joyce Drew is our search committee chair. She's in Houston looking for you." Those are the God things you don't ignore. What I haven't told, I don't think, is about why my papers got put out in the first place. I was really happy in Houston. I was really happy in Houston. I loved the weather. I loved the congregation. It was a wonderful, wonderful place. We were in the midst of search and call looking for a senior minister. And the personnel chair came to talk to me. He was a man by the name of Eric. Eric was probably one of those people that he's just one of the biggest jerks I ever met in my life. And he was proud of it. You know, those people are everywhere. And he came to me and he said, John, it's time for you to fly solo. You need to be a senior minister. You need to get your papers out, and you need to be looking for a church, because it's time. You've done incredible things here, but it's time for you to move on. Now, when he says things like that, I don't always believe him, just because of who he was. But I've been having that gnawing thing in the back of my head anyway. And don't you hate it when the voice of God comes out of somebody you don't even like? But the real reason wasn't it was time for me to fly solo. The real reason is they didn't have enough money to pay me and the new senior minister. I would have felt better if he just said that. And he finally did after long conversation. But he said, I need you to find someplace new before the new guy gets here. Okay. I was devastated. It's not like I was being fired from a job, because the only person that was pushing me out was somebody that nobody else liked in the congregation either. But having to hear that from somebody, but it put me in the right place to be up here for vacation, to talk to Loma, to go back down and talk to Joyce Drew. I wasn't ready to leave, but God was ready for me to go. That put Nick through some hard times. It really did. You know, sometimes you feel like you're thrown in a pit. And there's no way to dig yourself back out. But coming here was a God thing. It's been a little over 4 years. And we're not where we need to be yet. But in these 4 years, we've come a long way. Now, part of it has been this before we're starting this uptick. But we had to go through that. We, as a congregation, had to go through the pit in order for us to get where God is sending us to go. Whether it's a congregation, whether it's individuals, we've all been in places and in times in our lives when we're in the pit. And it's not an easy time. When things aren't going well, we still have to stand up and say, but I'm going to serve God. It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 71 or 49 or 94. We've all been born for greatness. It may not be that we're supposed to lead a corporation or that we're supposed to be the one in charge of Egypt. It might be that what we're called to do is to pick up a phone and call somebody and say, I know you're hurting. Do you want to talk? God sees a purpose for each and every one of us. God put us all on this planet for a reason. And it may not be a predestined reason but I think the decisions that we've made through the years have brought us to a place. Maybe the reason is simply to live your life as best you can and know when to stand your ground, like Rosa Parks. Friends, you've been born to greatness. Discover the great things God still has in store for you, even if you're a teenager or even if you're in your 80s or 90s. God calls you. Amen.